Hi there. Are you wondering what to do when you don't have enough time for quality time? So, the recommendations around how much time kids need, whether it's one on one or just when there's no other pressures on our time, vary significantly depending on which expert you listen to. And whether there's an amount of time per day or the rules and stipulations about what quality time looks like or what one on one time looks like that is optimal for your child's emotional development and attachment to you, then we really want to look at we start to assess ourselves. Is my level of achievement in terms of quality time with my child, is it enough for them? Is it against these criteria? Is there enough time? Is it the right kind of circumstances? And then what it kind of tricks us into thinking is that there is like a specific amount of time, or there's a specific way that you can know that you've done enough. And one of the things that I find most difficult about that is because it easily becomes a stick to whip ourselves with. It easily becomes, well, of course he's having attention because I haven't prioritized spending time with him recently. And I actually get like this sensation that kind of comes up in my chest when people say things like that because yes, it may well be true that your child is desperately needing connection with you and that's why they're having a tantrum. But it's often not actually the reason. And part of the reason why is that our time when we spend connected with our kids, it meets some really deep needs of theirs. So for example, when we spend one-on-one quality time with our kids, it is so good for their needing to matter, for their needing to feel connected to somebody that loves them, and like a whole host of other different needs that it meets for them. Now, some of those needs are some of the deepest needs that they have. And so that's why it obviously seems really critical. It seems really important for us to spend as much quality time as we can with our kids. But there's a couple of angles that I think are important to understand. So for example, if you look at a child's need to matter, that need exists independent of individual parents. So it's not that my need to matter is contingent on whether I matter to my mother. My need is to matter. And there are a bunch of things that are really, really hard to deal with if we don't feel like we matter to our own mothers or our own fathers or, a particularly important person to us in our lives. So it's not to say that there are not issues to work through, but if you imagine kind of like from a time where, things have gone past in our society, where you had a village around a child, that if they had their need to matter met by everybody else in their village except for their mother, that relationship would be difficult. But all their other needs to matter, to be attached, to be supported, to be comforted, all of those needs, they're met, even though they never felt like they mattered to their mother. And so I think it's really, really important to recognize the difference between a need and what we have to give to our children. So that's the first really important thing. Now, that doesn't mean to say, so part of the tricky part in our society now is that we don't often have strong relationships between children and other people because we tend to be quite insular. And even if we have close family friends, the strength of those relationships between children and other people is not as and very broadly speaking, if you're a family that has this between your children and family friends, that's fantastic. But very, very broadly speaking, those strengths of relationships are not there because very, very broadly speaking, we just don't have as much time and space in our lives for relationships. If you look at a family where everybody is heavily scheduled, there's plenty of activities, but where's the time for that child to build relationships with other adults? Relationships that aren't contingent on the activity or the class. Generally speaking, it's very, very little time. And so what we really want to look at is, in the context of, am I giving my child enough quality time? for this particular piece, if you imagine, the need to matter being filled, and it's a really, really important need, then of course our child will always want more and more and more of that. Now, the trick is it doesn't have to come from us, it can come from other people, and it can even come from within themselves, because we want everybody to feel like they matter in the choices that they make for themselves, the self-care, the choices that they make for themselves. So that's the first thing to think about, is that if you're the only person that makes your child feel like they matter, then it's really time to look at where are the relationships with my child can have with other people where they feel like they genuinely matter. The second thing we want to look at is that we culturally, and again, very, very broadly speaking, have lost the ability to make quality time part of life. So you see a lot of questions from parents saying, I need my children to look after themselves while I clean the house. Well, it genuinely is possible to be connected while you clean the house. Now, that feels like an overwhelming thing, and I almost hesitate to say it out loud because I don't want people to feel like, oh, well, that's something I'm not able to do and so I'm not good enough. But actually what it means is that the way we train people in our schools and in our businesses and in our jobs and lives, we train people to be as efficient as we can at this task and then move to the next one and then move to the next one and then move to the next one. We don't focus on how we do things. So for some families, including the kids in the chores is actually a really good way to go. For other families, that just doesn't work for a lot of reasons. And no reason is better than another. If it doesn't work, you can still be fully connected to your child while you're cleaning. And so I want to take away from this idea that quality time has to be one-on-one, or the quality time has to be, doing a kid-focused activity, or the quality time has to look and feel like this, that, and the other. Really, the only thing that I would suggest needs to be in place is perhaps not rushing. And even that, maybe it could still be quality time, but I think that's probably the main thing, is that it's hard to stay connected while you're rushing. So looking at that place of like, where could quality time be? So I'll give you a really, really small example of what I use in the car. So I noticed that our mornings were, a hurried mess some years ago, and it was really, really difficult and hard for everybody. And so when we got in the car, I noticed that I'd be kind of like focusing on driving and thinking about what I needed to do after I dropped them off. And, there's all this kind of stuff going on. And so I kind of noticed that there was such a disconnection between us, but at the same time, I wasn't really in the most emotionally open place because I was rushing and I had a lot of things to do after I dropped them off. And so what I found myself doing was just looking at the lights. So we're stopped at the traffic lights, not while we're driving. And I'd look in the rearview mirror and I'd keep looking until I caught her eyes and I'd close my eyes away. And then I'd look back at it, and if she was looking, I'd close my eyes away. And there was this beautiful connected moment where this wasn't, the kind of time where, it was a good time for either of us to be talking about big, deep things that were going on for us. It wasn't the type of quality time that necessarily felt spacious, but it was such good connection that set us up for a really good drop-off. So I want you to start thinking again, is that what does quality time mean? Is it can look different. Quality time can happen in and amongst the day-to-day hurriedness. Quality time can happen while doing the dishes. Quality time can happen basically when you're doing anything. Quality time can happen. And then the last piece I want to really focus on, excuse me, I'm going to cough. The last piece I really want to focus on is like this idea that there's like a set amount of time that's quality time. So when we think about like, what does the filling the cup mean for our kids? I think that quality time has a couple of roles. So if we think about the different types of quality time, as we're just having quality of connection in the course of running our day, that's one type of quality time. I think that there is a space for quality time that doesn't necessarily need to be, a set time and we're doing a kid-focused activity or blah, blah, blah. But I think there's a genuine space for quality time that is the kind of quality time that allows for whatever's going on for our kids to bubble up and for them to talk about it. And so for a lot of kids, like for older kids, doing the dishes can be that. But there's a difference between we're doing the dishes as fast as we can and we're having a great time, we're enjoying each other's company, we're very connected, versus there's enough stillness, enough space, and enough emotional capacity on both sides for us to allow whatever's going on for our kids to bubble up and for us to talk about it. And this is where I see a big issue with when we say I have my quality time with this child on Tuesday afternoon and I have my quality time with that child on Saturday morning, is that we focus on, like, there's an objective in that quality time. The objective is we're going to be really connected, or we're going to have fun, or whatever. Like, there's a thing that's going to happen and it's scheduled. And that almost comes with like an agenda. Even if it's just to hang out and have a good time, if it comes with an agenda of this is the time for us to have fun, it's not emotionally spacious enough for our kids to let whatever's going to bubble up come up and for them to say it. And one of the things we want to do is recognize that we are not always in the best place for our kids to bring up what's emotional for them. It is reasonable, rational, and okay for us to be in a place where today is not a good time to deal with deep things that are really important and emotional for our kids. And that being the case, if you're always scheduling your time on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock with your, that's my one-on-one time, that's my quality time, this is how I make sure that my child's getting enough. And even if it's daily, whenever it is, if it's scheduled in, it's almost like we kind of are locking ourselves into being emotionally present. And we can't always schedule emotional presence. Sometimes we can do our best. Sometimes just having some strategies to kind of ground ourselves and be ready, it can work. But oftentimes you can't actually decide that I'm definitely going to be emotionally present on Tuesday at 3. And so I want you to think about, rather than how often am I having quality time, rather than, oh, if only I didn't have this job, I would have more space to have quality time with my child, is looking at a couple of things. What is the actual need? And am I assuming that it needs to come from me, or is it that it can come from someone else or something else? The second thing is, how are we creating a quality of connection throughout our day? It's not a set time, but it's actually something that we aim to have as much as we can through the day. And that third thing is, where is the space? And ideally we'd have a lot, but these days we're kind of unpacking a lot culturally, so I'm not suggesting that it's an expectation, but the more space you can create where you know you're ready to help your child if something bubbles up and comes to the surface and they want to process it. And they know how to read you, so they know how to say, actually, mum's ready for me to talk about this, because you know how hard it is when you've kind of bared your soul to somebody who just wasn't in a place to be able to help you. It's quite hard. So having that skill of being able to read that this is a good time for me to bring up what's important to me, what's bubbling up for me, and then actually having the space to deal with that. So where is that space in your life? So I've covered a lot of ground of some big touchy subjects today. This is stuff that kind of goes to what kind of childhood are we creating for our kids. And I want to just reiterate, because sometimes when I'm talking about options and strategies and our aims, it can feel like there's a pass-fail assessment, and we can end up thinking to ourselves, well, I'm not doing well enough on that. And I just want to reiterate, this is true of all of my videos, but I really try and emphasize it on the ones that are particularly close to the bone, is understanding that there is always a way to make it work. There is always a way for you to find a way that feels good for you and does what it needs to for your children in their emotional development. Almost everything we do in emotional development doesn't have a time limit. It's not like if you miss your window, it's over. obviously things can happen more naturally at different stages of life, but the reality is that there is no screwing this up. And I know that's hard to hear because there's a lot of people who will have you believe that you have already screwed it up and you've already, done such a terrible job that you'll just forever be, trying to chase your tail to catch up. But there is no screwing it up. It's just about noticing that the parenting that works will feel better. So if anything in what I'm saying is encouraging you to do something that feels more pressure or feels harder, then it's not the right solution for you. So we want to go back to principles and think about, for me, in my situation with my child, my family, what out of these broad kind of principles, what can I apply? There's always a way. And as I say, if it's the right strategy for your family, it will feel easier. So I would love to hear any questions that you have in the comments. Please do share what ahas this has brought about for you and what you're going to try, and definitely come back and let us know how you go. Now, if this is something that you'd like to unpack, if finding a way to have the kind of quality time that you want for your children, if that fits in with your lifestyle, if that's something that you'd like to unpack, send me an email, Jodie, Jodie @jodiethornton.com, and let's talk. Let's really look at what is in the way right now of you feeling confident and comfortable about the quality time that you're having with your children. And let's see if we can make a plan, because we really want that confidence and feeling of peace of mind that the way I'm parenting feels good to me and feels good for my kids. Thank you so much for listening.